Chapter 5. Alex. I glared at Jonas and then strode away, met Max, kissed him as he stepped into the foyer holding a satchel. He opened the door and said, "I don't want to leave you, baby. I wouldn't, if I didn't have more property to sell off. It's a bad time. Even with all our money and investments, we could still have something to worry about. The banks are calling in the loans on the properties I'm keeping for my children, and if something happens to me, you'll be okay for the rest of your life." I had more money than I'd ever need in a lifetime. Max must know that, and he knew about the money coming from Christian's death. I have to make sure the banks will give me loans until this economy turns around. It was the first time Max had included me in his business. Were things with him worse than I thought, or was that the new Max I was facing? I thought he had it all together, but it appeared something was wrong. He didn't say more, and I watched as he entered the limo, and the driver drove him away to the private airfield where his jet was waiting. When I dressed and entered the kitchen, Jonas had changed into a pair of cargo shorts and a white short-sleeved shirt. "You look like you've adapted to this Texas weather," I observed. "I learned to adapt," he said as he placed 2 pancakes on my plate, and was ready to load it up with hash browns and a fried egg. "No, Jonas. I can't eat. Blood work, you know. Where are the children?" "The nanny had them dressed, they ate, and they're off to day camp. You stayed in your bedroom longer than they expected, and they were eager to go. But I asked her not to let the children leave before I had a chance to kiss them. When children get that age, just like Maxim, the last thing they want is for their mother to be kissing and fussing over them. You'd probably tell them they couldn't wear their favorite hat or shoes and hand them a can of bug spray." "Yes, I would tell them if they didn't have on socks and if they had a chance of getting bitten by bugs. This is Texas, Alex. They're going to get bites from bugs." Jonas and I turned around to see Maxim standing behind us. "Well, you've finally come home," I said, my voice stern, showing my disapproval. He trotted over to me and gave me a hug. I pulled away. "Where have you been?" "Didn't Dad tell you?" "Something about staying at a friend's house." "Don't do that again without my permission." "Where's everyone?" Maxim said, glancing around and sitting at the kitchen island, then eating the pancakes Jonas had prepared for me. He raised his hand to Jonas, who smiled and said to me, "I got this. Young man, your mother was worried about you." "For what?" "I know how to take care of myself." I reached for his arm. "You didn't ask anyone to get these tattoos," I reminded him. "You know, when you go off to college, they take into consideration the number of tattoos you're wearing." "I'm not going to college, and if I do, it will be to make you happy, Mom. Besides, college is 2 years away." And he placed a mouthful of pancakes in his mouth after drenching them with syrup. "Sit and eat, Maxim, and don't go anywhere without telling me. Your uncle is standing in for your father at the doctor's office." "Is something wrong?" Maxim inquired. "It's not cancer or anything like that," I said. "Your mother could be pregnant." "Like having a baby?" "I don't want any children," Maxim said. "You're young, and you shouldn't make that decision now." "You don't have a girlfriend," I reminded him. He glanced up at me, holding a glass of orange juice. "Didn't Dad tell you I have a girl now?" "What do you have to say now, Mom?" He glanced at me with a smirk. "If you're not going to have children, then I suggest you be careful and carry condoms. This is Texas, and the Supreme Court has taken away your decisions." Jonas interrupted, "Your mother wants you to be able to make those decisions when you're older." "I have to leave, Maxim. Get some rest, and I should be back in 3 hours. Then when your father returns, he'll talk to you." Uncle Jonas had already told me about the birds and the bees. Maxim looked at Jonas and laughed when I walked away to get my purse. When I met Jonas in the garage, Maxim was striding to his room. "What was that all about, and why did you interrupt me when I was talking to Maxim?" "Because he's a boy. Boys want their fathers to talk to them and tell them about wearing condoms and making sure the girl is on birth control pills. He's 16 years old, for fuck's sake, Jonas." He's a man. And you're not his father. The room grew silent, and hid my frustrations and Jonas's feelings about me being pregnant, maybe by him. I could only tremble at the thought of Jonas being the father of my child. Any other time there might have been something I could have done about it, but now wasn't the time, even if I'd contemplated a solution. Because I never knew I was pregnant until it was too late. That brought on more problems for me. After all, I'd gotten pregnant under duress and by force, and heaven help me if Jonas hadn't been there for me. It could have been by some nameless and faceless man, and I would have no other recourse but to live and hope Max would understand. Would the new Max have understood? This keeps getting worse for me. Just when I think my life is changing with Max, and it has become complicated to the point where I don't know how I can handle all of this. I stepped into the car and still the silence rode with us like a specter, haunting me. Jonas turned out of the subdivision and onto I-10, headed for the doctor's office. Then Jonas glanced my way for a second. Maxim asked me if it was all right to go to the beach. What? That's in Galveston, I said, my voice rising and shrill. Yes, I know. But what is the big deal, Alex? You behave as if he's a baby. He's my baby, and he didn't ask me. He talks to you, and that's what's bothering me and has me concerned. I said before, were you listening? Boys want to have those conversations with another man, not their mother. Just like girls want to talk to their mothers. Some girls. And I heard every word you said, Jonas. You've been through so much, Alex, calm down. He touched my arm and I jerked it from his grasp. I didn't need his superior male attitude. I'd had enough of that to last a lifetime. Those Blackstones had been taking me through hell since I met them, and now Jonas was telling me to calm down because he thought I couldn't handle my young son. I'd been handling him and Max and all the craziness they'd gotten me into for years. I should be insane by now, but I wasn't, and I knew what was good for my son, and this wasn't it. Maybe I was insane, or could be. With this next set of problems of the pregnancy I had to navigate, who knew where I might end up? Jonas had been speaking, and I hadn't heard a word he said, but I did hear his next words, and because of that, I turned to him with a narrowed glance. Don't you understand, Alex, you haven't been home. Nannies are raising your children. Max and I went through that. Whose fault is it that I wasn't there for my children, and especially Maxim? And look how you two turned out. Think about it. Another blanket of silence covered us, as if it was a cold day, and perhaps it was because of the frosty air that settled between me and Jonas, and it made me shiver at what I'd said to him. I wasn't up to arguing with him, and he never argued with me to this point, or said mindless things to me. Jonas reached the doctor's clinic on Interstate 10, going east, and pulled into the parking lot and cut the motor. I waited for him to say something, but when he didn't, I said, "Do not call Max and tell him what the doctor discusses with me. And if you insist on being in the waiting area, that's okay, but you will not be in the room for the tests and the examination." Jonas's brow furrowed and he huffed, but he didn't say a word, and after I'd had my say, he opened the car door and made it around to open the door for me, and held out his hand. My eyes locked with his, and somehow we knew each other's thoughts, and we knew now wasn't the time to be bitter with each other. We had gone through a lot within a year, and at some time we were each other's best friends. It was what happened on that cursed vessel that had torn our lives apart, and perhaps made us lovers and enemies. I felt the gulf that stood between us now, and it had to do with whether the child I thought I was carrying was his or Max's. If it was at all possible, I would never tell Jonas the truth. As long as it wasn't said, then he would never know, I rationalized. And a lie was as good as the truth, if the main purpose was to save a family. Reaching for Jonas's hand, I placed mine inside his, and for some reason I felt safe around him. Before I had to save Jonas, and then it was Max, but now I had been put in the position of saving myself. I wondered how that would turn out. Chapter 6. Alex. Jonas sat and stayed quiet for once as I filled out a form, answered all the questions. He knew when and how to remain silent because of his soldier's training. He knew when I was upset from his time with me, and from all the foolishness I'd endured at his hand, and the times he'd been incarcerated from marrying underage women, and when Crystal sued him for child and spousal support, to which he knew well from dealing with attorneys who told him to shut up and let them do the talking. When the nurse called my name and I stood, our eyes locked, and he glanced knowingly at me like a child who had been forbidden to cross the street without his parents. Jonas knew not to go against my request when I asked him to stay outside in the waiting room. He knew how to wait in a hospital waiting room, because he'd been there for me with my other children when they were born, and when Max wasn't there for me. The nurse glanced over holding the door and said, "Mr. Blackstone, you can accompany your wife if you want to." "I'd prefer to wait here," he said, gathering side views from the pregnant women sitting waiting for their names to be called, with their husbands holding their hands. Before I strode into the doctor's office, I paused long enough to hear someone ask, "Mr. Maximilian Blackstone?" The man didn't give Jonas a chance to tell the truth, that he only had the face of Maximilian Blackstone, and now he could claim it as his own, but did not wish to do so, especially not now. "I saw your picture in a billionaire magazine. You even did an interview on the Billionaire Morning Show in England, and I happened to be lucky enough to see you and shake your hand at a seminar your company hosted." As I walked through the doors, I paused once more to take a look at Jonas. He seemed uneasy, and no doubt he would be, because he knew little or nothing about finances, and if the guy insisted on asking any more questions, he'd get up and leave without a word. Jonas's body language said it all. He didn't want to be bothered, especially in a doctor's office, because at this moment he was Maximilian Blackstone, and everyone who saw that face knew he'd been too rich to have to put up with anyone who would invade his privacy, and nothing could be as private as having to answer personal questions and being identified in a public place like a doctor's waiting room. I sat in an examining room, dreading the invasive things that some doctors would do. And there had to be pictures to make sure what his hands couldn't find. Pictures would and pictures didn't lie, Jonas had said when I saw a photo of him and his first wife. She looked even younger, sitting next to him on their wedding day in some bridal church off the Las Vegas Strip. When my mind wandered for a few minutes, the doctor knocked and entered the room looking awkward, uncomfortable, and nervous. "You're young," I blurted out in surprise. I'd expected someone older. I glanced at his nameplate to make sure he was who they said. The same way they asked thousands of questions to make sure you were the right person. "Your husband asked for me." "I'm the best at what I do," he assured. "I don't doubt that, but are you going to give me an exam too?" At this point, I wasn't comfortable having a young man my age touching me. Christian had been young like this doctor, and the thought of Christian touching me, pawing over me, had been too traumatic and too recent for me to forget. Maybe I'd never forget what transpired on his yacht. Maybe I needed to lie down on someone's couch, but I knew I never would. "It's customary to do a physical exam, the doctor said in a drone voice, as if thinking about his answer. "Can't I get used to you first? Maybe my next visit?" "Yes. We can, if all your vitals are sound. I'll send you for tests that aren't invasive and have my nurse take pictures of the baby. You know you're pregnant, and by the tests you took at home, I'll put you on vitamins. Your last visit to the clinic, we confirmed it when we tested your urine. When you're 25 weeks into your pregnancy, the second trimester, we'll take pictures to see how the baby is doing." That sounded great to me. The last thing I needed was to have a young strange man's hand inside my private area, probing for what I didn't know. Pictures should be all that they needed. It wasn't like we were in the Stone Age.